Picture this scenario. You finally did it. After years of grinding, saving every penny, investing wisely, and probably eating more ramen than any human should consume in a lifetime, you've crossed that magical 7-figure threshold. Your net worth statement shows a number that starts with a 1 and has 6 beautiful zeros trailing behind it. You're officially a millionaire. Congratulations, you've joined an exclusive club that represents less than 2% of American households. But here's the thing that nobody tells you about reaching your first $1 million. The moment you hit that milestone, everything changes. Not just your bank balance, but the entire landscape of financial risks you face. Suddenly, you're not just worried about making money anymore. You're worried about keeping it. And trust me, keeping wealth is an entirely different game with entirely different rules than building it in the first place. My name is Nick, and I spend an unhealthy amount of time thinking about money, wealth preservation, and why some people manage to build generational wealth while others watch their fortunes disappear faster than free pizza at a college dorm. If you're someone who's either approaching that first million or has recently crossed that threshold and wants to understand how to protect what you've worked so hard to build, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it helps you navigate the complex world of wealth preservation. Now, before we dive into the specific strategies that millionaires use to protect their wealth, let me share something that might surprise you. The biggest threat to your first million isn't market crashes, inflation, or even economic recessions. The biggest threat is actually you. More specifically, it's the psychological shift that happens when you see that 7-figure number in your account and suddenly start making decisions based on how you feel rather than what makes mathematical sense. Here's what typically happens. You've spent years being disciplined, living below your means, investing consistently, and making smart financial choices. Then you hit that $1 million mark and something weird happens in your brain. You start thinking you've figured out the money game completely. You begin taking risks you never would have considered before. You might splurge on expensive toys or lifestyle upgrades because, hey, you're a millionaire now, right? This is exactly where most first-generation millionaires make their first critical mistake. They confuse reaching a milestone with mastering wealth management. It's like thinking that finishing your first marathon means you're ready to compete in the Olympics. The skills that got you to $1 million are foundational, but protecting and growing that wealth requires a completely different playbook. The statistics are pretty sobering when you look at what happens to people who suddenly acquire wealth. Whether through inheritance, business sales, or lottery winnings, studies show that a significant percentage of people who come into substantial money end up losing it within a few years. The reasons vary, but they almost always come down to a lack of proper wealth protection strategies. So, what exactly does wealth protection look like when you're dealing with your first million? Well, it's not just about picking the right investments or hiding money in offshore accounts like you see in movies. Real wealth protection is about creating multiple layers of defense against the various threats that could erode your financial position over time. The first layer of protection, and probably the most important one that most people completely overlook, is getting professional help. And I don't mean asking your buddy who did well with GameStop stock for advice. I'm talking about building a team of qualified professionals who specialize in working with millionaires. Here's a statistic that should grab your attention. 69% of millionaires work with a financial advisor, compared with just 33% of the general population. Wealthy people consider financial advisors to be their most trusted source of financial advice more than 4 times any other source. This isn't a coincidence. Professional guidance becomes even more critical for first-generation millionaires who face unique challenges in wealth preservation. Think about it this way. When you had $50,000 to invest, making a mistake might cost you a few thousand. When you have $1 million, that same percentage mistake could cost you tens of thousands. The stakes are simply higher, and the complexity of managing larger amounts of wealth increases exponentially. A good financial advisor doesn't just help you pick investments. They help you see opportunities and blind spots that you might miss on your own. They provide accountability during market volatility and help ensure that emotional decisions don't derail your carefully constructed wealth preservation strategy. Most importantly, they help you develop a comprehensive plan that's custom built for your specific situation and long-term goals. But here's where it gets interesting, and this is something that separates people who build lasting wealth from those who just temporarily have money. The number one concern that millionaires have isn't about making more money. It's about taxes. According to recent research, the burning question that most millionaires have about their financial future is how taxes will impact them. This comes ahead of concerns about having enough money to retire comfortably or outliving their savings. This makes perfect sense when you think about it mathematically. Once you reach the $1 million mark, you're likely in higher tax brackets than you've ever been before. Your investment gains are subject to capital gains taxes. Your dividends get taxed. If you're still working and earning a high income, you might be facing marginal tax rates of 37% or higher at the federal level, and potentially much more when you factor in state taxes. In some states like California, high earners can face total tax burdens exceeding 50% when you combine federal rates, state income taxes, and additional taxes like the net investment income tax. Without proactive tax planning, you risk giving away a massive portion of your wealth to the government unnecessarily. This is where tax optimization becomes absolutely crucial for wealth preservation. It's not about avoiding taxes illegally or using sketchy offshore schemes. It's about understanding the tax code well enough to minimize your tax liability through legitimate strategies that wealthy people have been using for generations. Some of these strategies are relatively simple. Tax loss harvesting, for example, involves selling investments that have declined in value to offset capital gains from other investments. Municipal bond investments can provide tax-free income for high earners. Charitable remainder trusts allow you to donate to causes you care about while receiving tax benefits and income streams. Other strategies are more advanced but incredibly powerful. The backdoor Roth IRA allows high earners to access Roth benefits by converting a traditional IRA, even when their income is too high to contribute directly to a Roth account. The mega backdoor Roth IRA uses after-tax contributions to employer retirement plans to achieve significant tax-free growth over time. But here's what's really fascinating about tax planning at the millionaire level. The current environment presents both unique opportunities and potential risks that could dramatically impact your wealth preservation strategy. The lifetime estate tax exemption for 2025 is nearly $14 million for individuals and almost $28 million for married couples. This represents a massive opportunity to transfer wealth tax-free, but this window might be closing. The uncertainty around future tax legislation means that wealthy individuals need to be proactive about taking advantage of current tax benefits while they're still available. Waiting to implement tax strategies could literally cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars if tax rates increase or exemptions decrease in the coming years. This brings us to another critical aspect of protecting your first million that most people don't think about until it's too late. Asset protection. And this is where things get genuinely scary if you're not prepared. The moment you become a millionaire, you essentially paint a target on your back. Not necessarily for criminals looking to rob you, though that's a consideration too, but for lawyers, creditors, and anyone who might see your wealth as an opportunity to solve their own financial problems. Here's something that will probably keep you awake at night once you really understand it. In our increasingly litigious society, anyone can sue anyone for practically anything. That fender bender in the grocery store parking lot that used to be a minor inconvenience could suddenly become a $1 million lawsuit if someone discovers you have assets worth pursuing. It doesn't matter if you're the most careful, responsible person on the planet. All it takes is one accident, one misunderstanding, or one person who decides you're their ticket to financial freedom. This is why wealthy people become obsessed with something called asset protection, and it goes way beyond just having good insurance, though insurance is absolutely the foundation of any asset protection strategy. When you have $1 million in net worth, your umbrella insurance should match that entire amount. Most umbrella policies are sold in increments of $1 million up to $5 million. And frankly, if you're worth $1 million and you don't have umbrella insurance, you're essentially gambling with your entire financial future. But insurance is just the beginning. Sophisticated asset protection involves creating legal barriers between you personally and your wealth. This is where structures like limited liability companies and family limited partnerships come into play. These aren't just fancy tax avoidance schemes that rich people use to feel important. They're legitimate legal tools that can protect your assets from creditors and lawsuits. Think about it this way. If all your wealth is sitting in accounts under your personal name and someone successfully sues you, they can potentially access everything you own. But if your assets are properly structured within protective entities, even if someone wins a judgment against you personally, they might not be able to touch the wealth that's held within those structures. Now, some of you are probably thinking this sounds like something only ultra-wealthy people need to worry about. After all, you're not exactly Elon Musk buying Twitter on a whim, but here's the reality check. The difference between having no wealth and having $1 million is much more significant from a legal perspective than the difference between having 1 million and 10 million. Once you cross that threshold, you become what attorneys call a worthwhile target. For people with even more substantial wealth, asset protection can involve domestic asset protection trusts or even offshore structures in jurisdictions with favorable laws. These aren't about hiding money from the government or avoiding taxes. They're about creating additional layers of protection in countries that have legal frameworks specifically designed to protect assets from frivolous lawsuits and creditors. The goal isn't to become completely judgment-proof, which is probably impossible anyway. The goal is to make pursuing your assets so complicated and expensive that most potential litigants will think twice before coming after you. It's like having a really good security system on your house. It might not stop a determined professional thief, but it will definitely deter the opportunistic criminals who are looking for easy targets. But let's shift gears and talk about something that's arguably even more important for protecting your first million: investment diversification and portfolio management. This is where a lot of newly minted millionaires make mistakes that can cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars over time. Here's what typically happens. Someone builds their first million through a combination of saving from their job, maybe some real estate appreciation, and probably a decent chunk of stock market gains. They look at their portfolio and see that tech stocks or growth companies or whatever happen to perform well during their wealth building phase, made up a big part of their success. So they think, why change what's working? This is like a football team that wins the championship with a great passing game, deciding they never need to run the ball again. It might work for a while, but eventually other teams figure out how to defend against it, and you're left with no backup plan. The research on millionaire investment behavior is actually pretty surprising. Self-made millionaires typically structure their portfolios with a simple formula that might seem boring to people who are used to chasing hot stocks and cryptocurrency trends. 80% global stocks and 20% bonds. That's it. No complex trading strategies, no attempts to time the market, no concentration in whatever sector happened to be performing well recently. This approach might seem unexciting, but it reflects a disciplined mindset that prioritizes wealth preservation over wealth accumulation. When you're trying to build your first million, you can afford to take bigger risks because you have time to recover from mistakes. When you're trying to protect your first million, the calculation changes completely. Diversification works because different asset classes tend to perform differently under the same market conditions. When stocks are getting hammered, bonds might be holding steady or even gaining value. When inflation is eating into fixed income returns, real assets like real estate and commodities might be appreciating. The goal isn't to maximize returns in any given year. The goal is to minimize the chance that any single market event could devastate your wealth. Here's a practical example that illustrates why this matters so much. During the 2008 financial crisis, portfolios that were heavily concentrated in stocks lost 40% or more of their value. Some people saw their $1 million net worth drop to $600,000 practically overnight. But diversified portfolios that included bonds, international stocks, and other asset classes experienced much smaller declines and recovered much faster. The mathematical reality is that losing 40% of your wealth means you need to gain 67% just to get back to where you started. That's not a typo. If you have $1 million and lose 40%, you're left with 600,000. To get back to $1 million, that 600,000 needs to grow by 400,000, which is 67% of the remaining balance. This is why millionaires become so focused on avoiding large losses rather than chasing large gains. A 20% gain is nice, but a 20% loss requires a 25% gain just to break even. The mathematics of wealth preservation are completely different from the mathematics of wealth accumulation. For practical implementation, this means investing in index funds and exchange-traded funds that provide instant diversification at low costs. The S&P 500 has historically delivered about 10% annual returns over long time periods, and buying an index fund that tracks it gives you exposure to America's 500 largest companies with a single purchase. But diversification isn't just about stocks and bonds. It's also about geographic diversification, sector diversification, and even currency diversification for people who want to hedge against the possibility that any single country's economy or currency could experience problems. The beauty of this approach is that it's actually less work than trying to pick individual winners and losers. You're essentially betting on the continued growth and prosperity of the global economy, rather than trying to outsmart other investors who might have more information, better technology, or more experience than you do. Now, let's talk about something that becomes absolutely critical once you reach millionaire status, but that most people put off until it's too late. Estate planning. And yes, I know what you're thinking. Estate planning sounds about as exciting as watching paint dry in slow motion while someone reads you the phone book. But stick with me here because this is where things get genuinely important for your financial survival. Here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody wants to discuss. The moment you become a millionaire, the government suddenly becomes very interested in what happens to your money when you die. And by interested, I mean they want to take a massive chunk of it through estate taxes. Currently, you can pass about $14 million to your heirs without triggering federal estate taxes, which sounds like plenty of breathing room when you've just hit your first million. But here's the thing that most people don't realize. That exemption amount isn't permanent. Tax laws change, and they usually don't change in favor of wealthy people. The current high exemption levels are set to expire, and there's ongoing political pressure to reduce them significantly. What feels like a comfortable buffer today could become a serious problem tomorrow if you don't plan properly. Plus, if you're successful at growing your wealth over the next 20 or 30 years, you might find yourself in territory where estate taxes become a real concern much sooner than you expected. But estate planning isn't just about taxes. It's about making sure your wealth actually ends up where you want it to go, instead of getting tied up in legal battles, eaten alive by probate costs, or distributed according to state laws that probably don't match your wishes at all. Without proper estate planning, your $1 million could easily turn into $600,000 by the time it reaches your intended beneficiaries. That's not exactly the legacy most people have in mind. The foundation of estate planning starts with having updated legal documents. A will, obviously, but also powers of attorney for both financial and healthcare decisions. These aren't just pieces of paper that lawyers sell to justify their fees. They're the instructions that determine what happens to everything you've worked to build if something unexpected happens to you. Here's where it gets more sophisticated for millionaires. Simple wills might not be enough when you're dealing with substantial wealth. Trusts become incredibly valuable tools not just for tax planning, but for controlling how and when your wealth gets distributed. A revocable trust can help your assets avoid the public probate process, which means your financial affairs stay private instead of becoming public record that anyone can access. For people who want even more control, irrevocable trusts offer powerful benefits but require giving up direct ownership of the assets placed inside them. It sounds scary, but the trade-off can be worth it. Assets in properly structured irrevocable trusts aren't subject to estate taxes, and they're protected from creditors and potential legal judgments against the beneficiaries. The strategic gifting component of estate planning is particularly relevant right now. You can give away $18,000 per person per year without triggering any gift tax consequences. That might not sound like much, but it adds up quickly if you have multiple family members. A married couple with 2 adult children and 4 grandchildren could transfer over $200,000 annually without any tax implications. Over 10 or 20 years, that represents serious wealth transfer. But here's where the urgency comes in. The current favorable estate tax environment might not last much longer. Political winds change, and tax policy changes with them. Wealthy individuals who wait to implement estate planning strategies could find themselves facing much higher tax burdens if the rules change unfavorably. So there you have it, your roadmap for protecting your first $1 million from every threat imaginable, including your own excitement about having 7 figures in the bank. Professional guidance, tax optimization, asset protection, diversified investing, and estate planning. 5 pillars that separate people who build generational wealth from those who accidentally fund their lawyer's vacation home. The choice is yours, but your future millionaire self is definitely rooting for you to make the smart play here.